Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Jump Advisory session. And you are indeed very welcome. You can see that they've rolled me out. They've rolled me out. They've brought in the eye candy because Howard isn't available today. Unfortunately, he's with a client all day. So you have the pleasure of my company and, of course, my good friend Dave Pye here today. And we've got a particularly good subject matter today to discuss, and that is around the whole issue of, as Howard puts it, resurrecting lapsed clients. And I think that this is, and I'm just talk through quickly, Dave, something that I think is super important because people in our industry spend a huge amount of time desperately looking, as any organization does in any industry, but always looking for new business opportunities. And I think Howard's point here is that very often we have the opportunities, they've become lapsed clients, they've become organizations that we worked with in the past that for a variety of reasons are no longer working alongside us. And I think certainly in the note he sent out, he made some interesting claims about the percentage of clients that were typically once clients of ours that have now gone away. And his point is quite valid, I think, that, if you could bring back even 3 old clients that you could bill 30K from in the course of a 12-month period, you've got the best part of £100,000 sitting there. And the point here, and I think you'll agree, is that it is a lot easier very often to reconnect with clients that have used you in the past, that have experienced your service, that have liked working alongside you. But we should also address in this webinar the fact that there are some clients that perhaps you fell out with, maybe not your fault, but things didn't quite work out the way you would have liked them to, or have disappeared with old consultants that have taken business with them, God bless them, and so on. There's a variety of reasons. So today we're going to really explore this issue. How do we get clients back? How do we resurrect organizations that were once good clients of ours who, for whatever reason, are no longer working alongside us? And that premise, I think it's a very important conversation. Dave, I'm going to start by asking you a question, okay? Get yourself ready, all right, and we'll crack on. So let's start with, as Howard puts this, the elephant in the room. There's a cliche, right?
Yeah.
Most recruitment leaders have databases full of lapsed clients. I think that would probably be quite true. People that they used to work with, but for whatever reason have disappeared. So when you think about your own experience of coaching and supporting and guiding recruitment companies, why do you feel that happens, that there's this long list of organizations that once worked with us that no longer work with us?
Paul, my experience is that most recruitment leaders don't leave their lapsed clients behind. New business is one of the hot topics, has been has been always, but certainly in the last 6 to 12 months, as the markets become challenging, people are looking for new business, and often, wisely, they turn to the clients that they used to trade with or that used to trade with them. So I don't think it's true as a statement that most people don't deal with lapsed clients. I think they do. I think it's just how far back they go and what data they use to look at what are lapsed clients. And I've always said that there is a wealth of information because in lapsed clients. And the point I always make when I'm chatting with recruitment leaders is, just as your business has changed over the last 3 years, so has the business of those lapsed clients. It's almost a guarantee that the people that were dealing with clients that you dealt with as an agency 3 years ago, they're not still there. There'll be new people,
Yeah.
there'll be new histories, there'll be new stories to tell, new stories to create. And sadly, given the turnover in our own recruitment businesses, the reality is that the consultant that dealt with those clients also isn't there.
Yep.
So whilst they're lapsed, they're still potential new clients. The good thing you've got, unless something's happened, which we'll come on to later, is that you've got a new story to tell them and a new story to create.
No, I think you make a great point. My experience of working with recruitment organizations as a coach, as a mentor, and so forth, and certainly as running businesses, is that I don't think it's true necessarily to say that lapsed clients are ignored and forgotten about. I think the bigger issue, and we can talk about this, is how you actually try to win them back. I do feel, and we will talk about this, I think, very soon as well, that maybe there's a lack of systemic methodology in retaining clients, in keeping in touch with organizations. And perhaps that's something that we should be thinking harder about. Maybe we leave the constant contact with clients to the memories, as it were, of consultants, rather than it becoming something that appears in diaries that is, it's automated. And of course, and we've talked about this endlessly, there's any number of software options these days to enable you to make this an automated process. And if we place ourselves in the shoes of customers outside of our industry, when we all know, if we buy stuff online, for example, in no time, you've got this kind of drip drip effect appearing in your email inbox, which never goes away unless you desperately get fed up with it and try and unsubscribe, which in itself is never easy. But it will carry on. Once they've got your details, you get this constant stream. Now, that isn't somebody sitting in an office somewhere thinking, oh, I ought to contact Dave Pye and see if he's still interested in working with us. That is obviously being done in an automated fashion. These are the sort of things that I think we need to address as an industry. But I absolutely agree that there's a huge amount of opportunity with lapsed clients. And indeed, let's just add to that point that we work with a huge number of organizations that don't just use us, of course. They're using multiple agencies. So there's great opportunities to gain extra business from existing clients too. We're able to kind of group that in there as well. All right, well, let's talk. Let's look at the sort of next question. In Howard's inimitable fashion, I will kind of try and read this question to you. If you can decipher it, do let me know, won't you? He's going to read this, by the way. I'm going to get absolutely slaughtered for making
Yeah,
these comments.
he's listening. I put down my PhD for answering the questions. I'm just a normal Dave Pye. I'm not a doctor of recruitment questions anymore.
Dr. Pye, no, okay, fair enough. Then I'll be Nurse Jacobs and try and read this to you. Not all lapsed clients are created equal, right? Some left due to genuine issues. Others drifted. Some may have gone out of business, which is perfectly true. Some may have gone with a consultant who left. So from your point of view, Dave, if you look at that and you look at the variety of reasons why businesses suddenly lose, organizations no longer use our services, what sort of process do you go through? Do you have a kind of client segmentation matrix of sorts that help you to actually categorize which particular dormant clients you're more likely to retrieve than others? Do you have a particular system you use?
I mean, I wouldn't call it a system, but what I'm always trying to get the clients I work with is to focus on what is their story. Why would somebody buy from you as an organization? Are you, and we've used this many times, are you a niche organization providing niche skills and therefore can capture a higher price, higher margin because you are demonstrating more value? So if you are a niche organization and you are supplying to a sector, or it could be skills based or a certain geography, then does the client that you used to trade with, that is lapsed, do they fit within those boundaries, within your dynamic? Are they an organization that you want to trade with? Because if they're not, then it doesn't matter how big they are or not. If they don't fit in with what you provide with your niche, which is where you add value and build value for your own organization, then you can park them. You don't need to go after every client that you used to trade with because some of them will have no relevance at all. And we've seen over the past few years, Paul, across the clients we've got at Jump, many of them have navigated into a slightly different niche.
Yep.
They've dropped some of the things that they used to do because they weren't providing value. And they've become more valuable as a company because they're focusing on certain areas.
Yep.
So go after the clients that are in that area and look back at your previous trading history and say, well, which of those areas and which of those clients can I go for? And remember, often you're not going for a client, you're going for part of a client. So if it's in tech and you provide data center skills, yeah, you're not that interested in necessarily in software engineering
Yep.
or front end development. You're
Yep.
interested in the data center side of things, yeah, which may include a bit of that, but it depends what your niche is. It depends strategically what you're trying to do with your business, and then look back. Which of the clients that I've traded with before, that I've got a story, that I've got a history with, can help me build on that?
Yeah, look, I think you make brilliant points. In fact, when I speak to organizations, I talk about what does your perfect client look like? And I mean, we all know that the word perfect is in itself imperfect. There's no such thing as perfect, but what does it actually look like? What kind of business do you want to work alongside? And your point is valid. There are organizations that perhaps you have worked with in the past that you no longer want to work with, that for a number of business reasons you feel aren't suitable. That may be that from a classic business perspective, they don't pay on time or they treat their staff
Yep.
very poorly. And I mean, we should have a conscience about that. If we know an organization isn't a particularly nice place to be, that treat their people very poorly, we should think very hard about whether we're prepared to introduce job seekers to them. So there are a whole range of reasons. If they're disrespectful to us, then maybe that's a decision we take. In fairness, and I always say this, if you only worked with organizations that you liked, you'd probably struggle to make much of a living. It's not a question of emotions, but there are some lines that you do not wish to cross. So what does your perfect client look like? I guess the old-fashioned Boston matrix comes into here that we often use when we sit down with our clients and we look at who fits where. And I think that that's something, if people were listening to this and haven't looked at Boston Matrix before, check it out online. It's a very simple matrix, 4 quadrants, where you group lapse clients into these 4 areas, and you make a decision as to whether they are hilariously, one's called a dog. So these are organizations, to your point, that you, for a variety of reasons, you don't want to work with any longer. And indeed, and I will be slightly provocative here, and these are companies that maybe you can headhunt from. If you're not going to work with them, why wouldn't you consider trying to tease people away and place them, perhaps in your opinion, in better organizations? That is indeed what search and selection organizations do. So which are the companies where you're not going to work with them, but they could be a decent, if you like, feeding ground, a place where we could perhaps take people from? Who are the growth organizations, the hot clients, as it were, the people that potentially you can gain more business from? Now, actually, in that box, you're including existing clients where you have opportunities to develop and grow your business, where you see opportunities to take business, maybe in the niche areas you mentioned, but also because you realize that your competitors perhaps are not providing the level of quality of service that you can provide. You're looking too at the rising stars. These are perhaps new organizations who maybe can't give you that much business at this moment in time, but in the next 2, 3, 4 years, because you've recognized that they're growing, they're developing, they could be superstar clients of yours in due course. And then you have on the final quadrant, cash cows. So please God, we all have at least one of these at some point. These are organizations that are going to spend a huge amount of money on recruitment for maybe a project, or perhaps because they have a new contract. It isn't going to last very long, but for a year, 2 years, you may make an awful lot of money by helping them, and then at some point they will go. So you have to carry on with your business development activities over here, ring fence the cash cow businesses down here, and make sure that you've always got new business coming through. So when that company disappears, your business doesn't suffer. I mean, the old Boston Matrix, I think, is a brilliant method of identifying which companies fit into which boxes, and enables you, I think, to filter through and focus on the organizations you have the best chance of converting again. And then I think it comes down to ownership, which is about saying who is going to start to try and infiltrate that business. And in my experience, you shouldn't ask one person to do that. It should be multiple contact points. I mean, back in my Hudson days when we did this kind of thing, we would ask the CEO to try and reach out to the CEO of that organization, so that peer group level. We might ask our CFO to call the CFO of their business. We might ask our senior consultant to try and reach out to somebody who's a senior manager. There'd be multiple entry points, and we would regroup and assess who'd managed to speak to who, and work it that way. And when we got client meetings, several of us would go on those meetings. So there's methods of doing all of this that I think is very important. Um, what I will say, and I think we are going to get to this point, is that, and I've said it already, it has to be systemic. It has to be systemic. And I think one of the things that is important to say here, Dave, is that you should ask yourself as a business leader, and I know this is an impossible position because you will never keep every client. No business ever keeps every client. It's not possible. But we should be asking ourselves, how do clients become lapsed? How do we prevent most clients becoming lapsed clients? So the thing here is to get in front of them becoming lapsed. How do we create constant communication with organizations so that we do understand whether they're happy or not with our services, and we do understand what's going on within their businesses to enable us to get in front of it. So if we had a dissatisfied customer, we're dealing with that situation at its root point, rather than finding out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 5 years later that something that we had inadvertently done has created a problem for us. And I think that's something maybe the leaders of businesses need to be thinking about. Reaching out. I know people are extremely busy when they run businesses, but take a dozen clients or a month and reach out to them. They will speak to you. You're the owner of the business. What's our service like? Are you happy? Are you comfortable with what we're providing, the quality of the people, and so forth? It's a great time to do that when jobs are filled by us, and it maybe you could argue an even better time is when we don't fill jobs. Why is it we failed on this occasion? It's to get in front of the situation rather than waiting till after the event to try and ask those questions. So if I could I'm going to stop talking for 5 seconds. If Howard was here, he'd probably be taking
He'd be going
norm
like
out
this.
of me at this point. I'd be getting horrible text messages. Okay. So here's what I hear from recruitment leaders all the time. They left because we were too expensive, or they went with a bigger firm, or they hired internally. But we know that agencies rarely know the real reason clients stop using them. So what are the reasons why, Dave, clients stop using an agency, and how do we, as it were, know the truth regarding those reasons why they've stopped using us?
I think most agency leaders and most senior people in agencies know why clients have chosen not to use them. And there is a myriad of reasons, and most of those reasons are absolutely valid. Yeah, the market's changed, they're looking for different skills, they've been bought, the consultant wasn't doing a good job, they weren't performing as good, the KPIs weren't as good. There's a whole list of reasons, and most of them are true. The key thing for me on this point, Paul, is that as the agency owner, you need to know the reason. If your consultant says, oh, they're not using me because we're too expensive, go and find out. Is that really true?
Mm.
I'm not saying that the consultant is lying, but sometimes consultants don't want to admit that it could be down to them.
Mm.
And what you find, and I've found this to my cost as well, I found it when I've gone to talk to clients, they've just said, I didn't like Tim. I didn't like Heather. We just didn't click. Yeah, she was all right. The service was okay, but we didn't click. But what you're talking about is personal relationship. Yeah. Again, Ford have 400 buyers of different technical staff around the world, different staff, whether technical or others. Yeah, so lots and lots of different people. You as the owner need to satisfy yourself that your team are doing the best of their ability and that you know that the client is happy or not with that service. And then you can decide, right, we want to carry on trading with you and we want to give you the opportunity to trade with us. We're going to change the consultant. Or we're changing direction. You're wasting our time. The client may say you didn't perform very well, but the flip side of that is you may say, yeah, but you had a 4 interview process and you took 3 weeks to hire. The market didn't want candidates with these skills waiting 3 weeks. We don't want to trade with you. This is not all just about what the client says. It's what we say as agency owners. Is that good for our business? Is trading on a PSL at 9% good for our long-term business and long-term value if we're only hitting 1 out of every 4 positions or 1 out of every 5 positions? So it's a two-way street. But as the agency owner, founder, MD, whatever your role is, you need to know what the answer is as to why you're not trading with them.
Yeah, and I agree. I think and we've alluded to this point that we hear broad brush statements, too expensive or they've gone elsewhere or whatever, and it's just too light touch. We need to get deeper to really understand what happened. And you make a great point here. And we know that the fact is when we talk about we have a relationship or an agreement with Joe Blogg's company, the stark reality is most of the time we have a relationship with one or two
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
human beings, right?
yeah,
Very often, I mean, and we know this as professional recruiters, we know that people change jobs quite regularly in this day and age. You look at the average CV now, and if you have a point of tenure of 2 to 3 years, that's considered fairly long term in this day and age. People change jobs. So the person that we had a relationship with may have been promoted or moved to another part of the business, even another part of the country or abroad, or they may have left and gone somewhere else. That may be as simple as that we just lost contact with somebody that actually we had a great relationship. And the key point here is you need multiple contact points in any organization. It's not just, it's important as leaders to establish who are we working with. We're working with Dave Pye. Great. Who does Dave Pye report to? Do we know that person? Who else is on Dave's peer group level, other recruitment buyers, and so forth? And our job, once we've got into a business, is to consistently look at the organization chart and ask questions. Who else should we be in touch with? Because don't forget that the chief buyers, the people with the most influence, are very rarely the people who have connections with us. They're the people that sit around the board
yeah,
table or sit in
yeah,
purchasing or wherever else, HR. So we need to have a professional approach to establishing multiple contact points in an organization so that when an individual leaves a business or is moved somewhere else, we have other contact points. We don't lose that relationship. So this is, strategic selling that I often train and coach people in. It's making sure that you're covering the basis because as sure as eggs is eggs, at some point, the person you have a wonderful relationship is going to move on. Now, by the way, there is a positive to that, and that is that if they move to another organization, you have a great opportunity, go and do business with a new organization because you have a great relationship with that person. Quite likely, there's a great likelihood that if you ask, they'll take you with them, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
So there are pluses too. Okay, so if we get practical here, most agencies attempt to re-engage lapsed clients with just a sort of check-in email or a LinkedIn message that essentially doesn't get us very far. If you had to develop a multi-touch contact sequence that actually gets responses and reopens doors, what would that look like, Dave? Are there key touch points or channels that your clients are using, and what sort of messaging strategy do you think makes the difference? Is it something that's fairly light touch, consistent, or does it come across as kind of pushy? How would you describe it?
I would try not to be pushy. Remember, we all know this, don't we? We get bombarded with emails every day. There's a big difference in terms of how people respond to an email. If you open your email, if your heading in your email is, were you aware that, and you provide them a bit of data, that is so much more powerful than starting with something like, we haven't been in contact for a while. I thought I'd contact you. I noticed we used to do business with you. I thought I'd contact you. You have to offer something of value to the personnel, the people at the client that's lapsed, that maybe intrigues them. You have to be intriguing. And it doesn't just have to be on email, it can be on LinkedIn, it can be a piece of data that you've got or a white paper or something. Often I will start an email with, saw this and thought of you. It's quite attention grabbing, it's not threatening, but here's something I was reading about water, the growth of data centers and its effect on water. So I've got a client that we work with that's in the supplying into the water industry as a recruiter. Here's something of interest for you. Yeah. And if it was a lapsed client that is in that sector, I'd try to give them something of interest because otherwise they're just bombarded. Yeah. The other place where you can have a strategy is at events. where you go to places where they're at. If you really want to get in with a client,
Yeah.
find out if that client is speaking somewhere, if there's an event where that client goes to, and go along to it. Because if you are personable and can hold a genuine conversation with somebody, that's the best way
Yeah.
of meeting someone. Because email takes a long, long time, isn't always the most successful way of doing it, but long term, um, have something where you can go along and meet them and trying to do it face to face.
No, you're absolutely right. And of course, they don't, it may be, frankly, that they don't need assistance at the moment. They're not recruiting.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
look at the scenario over the last few years in our industry. There has been a constant drop of permanent vacancies, and we know that unemployment has risen. Let's not get into all those reasons. We don't have the time, but that has been happening. It's not our fault. There's nothing we could do about it. But at some point, that organisation are probably going to turn on the tap again, and we want to be in their thoughts when that happens. For me, it's about offering them data and information. To your point, I saw this, thought you might find that of interest. It's definitely social media. We know that, and it isn't just about sending emails or messages of other sorts. It's about making sure that if they're posting something that you're commenting, you're constantly seen to be commenting. I agree with you, Dave. Da 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 da. Making sure that you're in their thoughts in a very subtle way, nothing too strong, but you're there. You're someone that responds to things they say. Or if you read and you've something about won a new contract, the business is doing well, pop them a congratulations. And again, to your point, where are they going to go? It made me laugh when you were mentioning this, because I was thinking back to my early Office Angels days of running an office and desperately trying to get into certain advertising agencies that were in Charlotte Street in my territory, and not getting very far, but knowing that there were certain pubs that these people would go to in the evening, and we would, it didn't take an awful lot of persuasion, but we would end up in these pubs, and we knew who they were, and you'd get into conversation with people. As was amazing coincidence, we happened to be in the same place as them. If there's a will, there's a way. If you want to reach out to people, you want to meet them, then you do. And again,
yeah.
back to my old OA days. Okay, different model to the one we have today, but we used to walk into reception with, as everybody knows, chocolate angels or whatever else we were giving out, and desperately trying to speak to the person we wanted to speak to. And now I do appreciate those days may have gone to a large extent, but there again, if you're desperate to speak to somebody, you're determined, what have you got to lose? Just to turn up and say, look, I know it's a bit of a liberty, but do you think I could have 5 minutes with Dave Pye? No, well, okay, fine, but could you tell him I called and I'll try and reach him this afternoon? In the end, persistence counts. If you want it hard enough, it will happen. And we know that it's not the first call or the first message that makes a difference. It's the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th call or the message that gets through. And the trouble here, Dave, is that most consultants give up after one or two calls. They didn't want to speak to me. They're not interested.
And I'll tell you what strategy has worked with some clients that we've done recently: the good old fashioned letter.
Yes, good point.
Send a letter with something in the letter. So, an old trick that I used 20 years ago, we used 4 months ago. They were moving office. So, client, former client, 5 years earlier, haven't dealt with them. The consultant, we encourage the consultant to send them a letter, and they put inside it a black beanbag. Yeah. It's as simple as that. Now, it was the start. They didn't immediately then get loads of requirement. Yeah. But it was the start of an engagement, saw you'd moved, thought you may appreciate this. Whether it was too late or not didn't matter, but it was a letter.
Yeah.
And the client, she really appreciated the contact.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Now, I believe they will get some business.
Well, I think you're right.
They haven't yet.
Yep.
So it's not one of those stories and then this happened and millions
Yep.
came in,
Yep.
but they will, because they sent a letter, not an email.
Well, they've now got to send the polystyrene balls to put inside the.
Yeah.
That's your next step.
It's whatever you could do. But the reason they sent it to that particular client
Yes.
is because in their particular niche, that client was going somewhere.
Yeah. No, and I think this is.
So it was worth
Absolutely.
the mini effort to say. I don't know, first class letter cost today about £11, I think. But it's one of those. It was worth the effort.
And I think your point's very valid. I mean, I'm sure I'm no different. Even when I know I've received junk mail, at home, you still open it. You open the envelope and okay, you read it briefly and maybe tear it and throw it if it's junk, but you open it. How many times do you open emails? I mean, I go through my emails every day and without reading them because you don't want them delete, delete, delete. I don't think I'm different from anybody else.
No, no.
So I think the good old-fashioned handwritten letters, it's going to hit their desks, they're going to open it. That's a great call. I agree with that. I think that's absolutely the way. This talks to the point I'm making as well that if you're determined enough, you'll get there in the end.
Yeah.
And I think that that's about that multiple contact point, but it's also absolute persistence. It's persistence. So it kind of leads me to the next question, Dave, and that is, I mean, this is sort of Howard's terminology. I mean, here's the scenario that terrifies most recruitment leaders. They need to reconnect with a client when things have gone badly. Maybe they made a poor placement, maybe communication broke down, maybe there was a pricing dispute or a consultant left and took the business with them. How do you position the fresh start conversation in these situations? What's the actual language and framing that acknowledges what happened, takes responsibility where needed, and creates a genuine opportunity to reset the relationship?
First, decide whether a fresh start is what is valuable to your business. Don't assume that because something bad has happened and they're not trading with you, do you want to trade with them? Does your business need to trade with them? And if the answer to that is yes, then clearly you need a strategy to try to get them back on board. But often the answer isn't yes. Often the answer is I don't need to be on their PSL. Often I'm better trying to get one or two in by the sides. Yeah, so you need to understand before you have a strategy, does it fit in with your business strategy? And then for me, Paul, it's about personality.
Yeah.
Things are rarely done over email or letter, to my last point. If you can get to see them face to face at an event, provide them with some data, provide them with some information. Even if, for example, if you're in London and you can walk to their office and drop a report off for them, something like that helps. But allow the client as well to have a little time. If you've made a mistake, whichever way the fault is, give them a little time to recover from it before you go bounding in. But the best way is to do it face to face.
I would agree with you entirely. I made the point earlier that rather than wait, and I know I appreciate the point you've just made, but rather than wait months or even a year on, try and get there reasonably quickly. Now, one of the points I would make is that it depends on the size of your business. If you're one of the people listening here that's what we might term a micro business, it's just a few people, that's one point. If you've got several people, you're a business of 40, 50 people, you've got senior management quite likely, and you can share the burden. But whatever it is, please make sure as senior people in your organization that you're consistently, this is back to the systemic point I was making, reaching out to organizations that have used your services reasonably recently. So we filled a job, you genuinely, you might expect that the client would be happy with you, but a phone call, a connection of some sort from somebody senior is likely to land. Yeah. If we didn't fill a job, it isn't necessarily at all that we did a bad job. Someone else may have had a better candidate than us. Doesn't mean we did a lousy job. Very often when I've been in a situation, I've said to a client, I'm sorry we didn't fill the role. Can you give me reasons why? I get, well, you did a good job. There was nothing wrong with your candidates. We just happened to find blah, blah. So they're not upset with us at all. It's simply the fact that somebody found a better candidate than we did on this particular occasion. Either which way, you need to be speaking to customers on a regular basis. And I believe it should come from the senior staff. Now, that isn't to say that you're saying to your consultants, you do not ask these questions of your client. But here's a point I want to make. When is it likely that a consultant working for you, and there may be eyeballs rolling in a moment, but is it likely that if one of your consultants has done a bad job with a client of yours, that they're going to confess? Maybe they will, but it's quite possible they hope that you never find out. So when you ask them what happened here, they may say blah blah, some excuse. Do you know that's true? You don't know that's true. Now, you may believe long-serving staff, and there are people you would believe totally, but there'll be some you might have a few concerns about. So my view is, of course, we want our consultants to ask for feedback, and we can do that verbally, we can do that face to face, we can do that in written form, we can send out polls, and we can send out feedback forms and so forth, all of those things. But you, as an owner of a business or a senior person in an organization, should be taking a sample of clients every month and trying to reach them, ask them questions directly. Now, by the way, that's not new. I can even remember as a manager of an office back in Alfred Marks Bureau days and Office Angels days, doing the temp rebooks once every 4 weeks, nicely pushing my temps consultant away and saying, right, go and do some business development. I'm going to do the rebooks. I'm going to speak to all of our clients and just check in our temps for next week, find out what their needs are. Part of that process for me was just to ask the question, are you happy with the service you're receiving at the moment? And in most cases, the answer was perfectly fine, no problem.
Yeah,
But very
yeah.
occasionally, I stumbled across clients who would say, actually, I've not been particularly happy for whatever reason. In my view, sometimes they did, consultants pushed back, why are you doing this? Are you spying on me? Was, look, if you're doing a good job, you've nothing to fear. In fact, I'm hopeful that I'm going to be saying to you, well done, you've been brilliant here, here, and here, and here. But if there is a problem, let's get on top of it, And by the way, and this is relative to this point, these clients do not belong to my people. They belong to the business. They don't belong to the individual. They belong to
Yeah.
the company. And if I own the business, they're my clients. So I do need to know what people are thinking. It's not spying at all. This is helping. This is us saying, what else can we do for our customers that can accentuate and improve the service we provide to them? And if there is a problem, let's get on top of it real fast before it festers and becomes something that we can't change down the line. That would be my perspective. And I come back to this systemic issue of having those processes embedded in the business. So it isn't the case that we, once every few months or whenever, look at a board and go, what happened to this client? It doesn't come up. That's not a conversation you have because we are consistently reaching out to those organizations. All right, Dave, I think we've got a couple of questions left and we've got a few minutes. So let's pile in here. Timing matters as with this kind of thing, as I've just been sort of stating. If a client went quiet 6 months ago versus 3 years ago, does your approach change? And maybe there's a bigger question. How persistent should we be in this kind of resurrection process? At what point do you say, this one's not coming back and move on? Is there a framework that you would recommend for knowing when to push on or when to let go? Is there a point where you think, let's step away or let's push on?
The framework is about capacity. Are you closing the majority of the business that you've got? And do you have the capacity to continue to close business? If there's a gap in capacity and you haven't got as many jobs on as you need, so you've got the opportunity to do business development with former clients as opposed to just business development, work out what your capacity is. Do we need that client? With the skills that they've got, knowing what our value proposition is, we can provide a number of our services to that particular client. Yeah, they used to be a client, they're not anymore. What's the capacity we've got to go after them? Yeah, and hopefully win them back and provide our services. You've got to answer those questions and be satisfied that it is worthwhile pursuing a lapsed client because they're going to add value to your business if you get them. And if you can answer those questions satisfactorily, then away you go. And I don't think it's a time-bound thing. I don't think you say, we'll give them 6 months. If what you're doing is strategically try to winch them in, yeah, it's a bit like fishing, isn't it? If you've got a big fish, you want to get it over the line. You want to get that photograph with, here's me with
Yeah.
my big fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's important to you. If it's not important to you, then let it go, because there'll be other areas that your consultants can devote time to.
Yeah. No, I think you're completely right. But I think the question is, I'd be asking whoever owned, inverted commas, the client in my business, some deep questions. What do we know about this organization? What's going on there? How well are they doing? How many people have they recruited over the last 12 months, 6 months?
Yeah.
How many contractors or temps?
On?
Well, and the truth is, when you ask those deeper questions, You may find, please God, that you've got consultants that really are on top of it and can give you pretty informed answers, but you may also find rather vague answers because, to be blunt, they don't know. And if there are gaps in our knowledge about clients, then you can maybe convert that into opportunities. What is it we know? What is it we don't know? And as I say, if we don't know enough about an organization, how do you make a decision to walk away or to push on? You can't make that decision. The answer is you've got to find out more information. Now, the information gathering process in today's world is a lot easier than it used to be because it's out there. We can see it on websites, we can see it on social media, we hear it from candidates because the candidates we speak to are often working for the very organizations we want to reconnect with or connect with. The information is out there, and of course it comes down to the points you've been making. We want to talk to them, find out what's happening. Now, once you've got the information and you're informed, then I think the answer to this question is fairly easy. You know whether you want to push on or not push on. And I think that we don't have enough information 60 to 70% of the times to be able to make an informed decision about whether to pursue customers or not. And so I think it starts internally. I think you ask the questions internally. And if you're comfortable with the answers you receive, or if you're the person responsible for that client, if you don't have, there are gaps in your knowledge about an organization, you need to go and find out more information. As I've said, there are ways and means of doing that, not least picking up the phone or trying to get a meeting if you can do those things. But I think you've got to get more information before you formally make a decision. And to your point, when is a lapsed client a lapsed client? I personally think if we haven't spoken to them for 3 months, that's a lapsed client in my book. I think 13 weeks with no communication is super dangerous. Things change so rapidly in our world and with our clients that if you go 3 months with no communication or meetings or any kind of level of contact, you've lost contact. You don't know what's going on in that business. And when you don't know what's going on in that business, you have left the door wide open for one of your competitors to step in. So this is back to my point about embedded processes and systemic methods of contacting organizations. Those things I think are very important. Okay, I've got one last question for you, Mr. Pye. Is there an example of a recruitment business you've worked with that have kind of got in and successfully brought back a significant lapsed client? And how did they do it? What was the outcome? And was there a particular thing that made that a successful process from your perspective?
I'll give you an example from middle of last year. The client provided contract services, the agency provided contract services over a number of years to the client. Then consultant left, agency stopped using contractors, everything kind of died. Yeah, there was a bit of a breakup, poor communication. How they got it back was the client had no idea that the agency also had other services. For example, they could supply them with an embedded team. Client had no idea. So instead of focusing what they used to do, they focused on their value proposition was, well, we can help you internally with your recruitment by providing a person or two or three or whatever. And they took that approach. Yeah, you knew us from A, but actually we now do this. And this will add value to your company. And they said that to the client. And that was how they got back in. Clearly, there was a lot more to it than that, and it took time. But not all of the clients we trade with are aware of the services we provide. If we're doing well on contract, we may be doing less well on perm. We may not have an embedded option or a search option or whatever it is. If all of your clients don't know all the services you provide because you haven't told them, there's another way in there when things are looking a bit bleak or they become lapsed.
And I'm just going to finish our weekly meeting here with just trying to answer Gordon's note earlier where he said, when you talk about lapsed clients, are you talking about human beings or the companies? And he says perhaps you're talking both. He says dealing with lapsed human being clients can be just as important and different from dealing with lapsed company clients. And it's an absolutely perfect point. And we've made that, and I couldn't agree more, Gordon. We're dealing with human beings. And I'll come back to the point I made a moment ago. you've got to keep in constant contact with people because ultimately you're building relationships. And the wonderful thing about our industry, and it's not really changed that much, thankfully, over the years, is that, and it's the oldest adage in the book, people by people. If you've developed a great relationship, keep in touch with those people. Make sure you maintain that relationship. I know of organizations who, and I can speak personally about this, that have got great relationships with a human being who has moved on to other businesses and has taken us with them. And that happened not by accident, but because we maintained great relationships with that person. At the same time, we go back to the companies, and I come back to my earlier point about, and to your point about making sure we're consistently asking them, what else can we offer you? What's keeping you awake at night? How do we assist you in a whole range of different ways? But I think it's very much about making sure that we have multiple contact points in that organization so that we're not reliant on one human being's favor, that we have a number of points of contact within a location or multiple locations. We're spreading the risk. If somebody leaves or is promoted, we have other contacts, other people that are very happy with our service. And that, my friend, is very much, as you know, an ongoing process. You know, it's the never ending painting the bridge scenario. You never stop with that. So that, I think, brings us very much to the end of our weekly Jump webinar. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you gained a great deal of information from Dave and I. And we look forward to seeing you next week when Howard, of course, will return to this chair. So I'm again, thank you for joining us. And we wish you a great rest of the week ahead. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like some more information or there's something we've said that you'd like further detail on. Thank you again. Take good care, and we'll see you all very soon.
Have a great week, everybody. Cheers, Paul.
Bye now.